What is up, duelists? I just came back from the 300th YCS in Dortmund, and I'm happy to report I got top 16 with Sky Striker, which is obviously a deck I talked about in my most recent video where I talked about like how I choose tournaments for a deck. I already mentioned that I was considering Sky Striker for YCS Dortmund. If you haven't checked out that video, then feel free to do so. Before we hop into the deck profile, I got a few shoutouts to give. First and foremost, Team Raid and Trade, and most importantly, Dinka Bui, who played the exact same list once again, similar as we did in YCS Bologna. Also made day 2 with the deck. Yeah, in general, just the people I tested with and my team, really cool and very happy that I was able to make top 16 with a deck that I like as much as Sky Striker, which is also the reason why I picked it. Of course, Draco Tail and Radiant Typhoon and Vanquish Soul are all very viable decks in the current format that I all think are very strong as well, and I like them. So there was a lot of good choices, but ultimately I decided to go with Sky Striker because I felt like it had a pretty solid Draco Tail matchup and also does do very well into Radiant Typhoon, which was also my experience. Ended up going 8-1 on day 1, and then in total I went 12-3, which gave me a top 16 placement. But yes, let's talk about the deck list a little bit, and then we'll get over some of the details as well. Starting with the main deck. Of course, we're starting with 3 copies of Oh My God Yes, Sky Striker Ace Ray, followed by Oh My God No, 2 copies of Sky Striker Ace Rose. Spoilers, this list does have Pot of Desires, which is ultimately the reason why a second Rose is in here, because banishing a single copy of Rose if you only play one with Pot of Desires is very detrimental. I do side out 1 copy of Rose a lot, but for the main deck, I decided to play with 2 just to have a little bit of safety. Worst things, it can still be a starter. It's better than having no play, but realistically, you never want to draw this card if you have any. It's by far the worst out of your starters, so you would prefer not to never draw it. But with Desires, it kind of needs to be here. But yeah. Also, shoutouts to Young Cards for this OCG Sky Striker mat, which I didn't use during the tournament because I didn't want to give away what I was playing just from the playmat. But similar to the Molcharmi sleeves, you can pick the Sky Striker playmat up in the Young Cards store, and you can use Josh10 for 10% off. But yeah. All right, these are not the only monsters in the deck. We decided to play 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and 1 copy of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. These are important because we need to negate the Draco Tail traps, and also for Cross-Off Designator, which is in the main deck, so that's why it's specifically 1 Bell as well, because both of these are very good against Sky Striker, so having another out to those cards in the deck ended up being very important for me in testing, and so we ran with the cross out in the main deck, even though we don't have a lot of the other hand traps that people play. These are the 2 most important ones, and they are very popular. So this is the entire monster lineup, and the rest of the deck is just spells. So for the Sky Striker cards, we've got 3 engages, obviously. 3 Widow Anchors, and 3 Linkage. Then we've got 1 copy of Lemnis Gate, which is also kind of risky with Pot of Desires, but this card is, while being very good and important, not as important as Rose, I felt like. And also, of course, even if Rose is a mediocre starter, at least it is somewhat of a starter, while this card is not. So we decided to take the risk of just playing 1. If your hand can already play the game before you Desires, then you can, before you activate Desires, then you can sometimes search it before activating Desires. But yeah. 1 Shark Cannon. This card is pretty awesome, this format. It has a lot of really unique applications. For example, you can steal Fallen of Albaz in the Draco Tail matchup and make your fusion monsters, because we play the Fallen and the Virtues, so we've got some Albaz fusions in the extra deck. We can steal Radiant Typhoon monsters and use their effects because we're playing the Radiant Typhoon quick play spell, so we've got targets for that. You can steal Murakumo against Mitsurugi decks and use its effect, or you can just use it as a DD Crow, which also ends up being very important a lot of the times. 1 Hornet Drones as a starter / extender, it's fine. As well as 1 copy of Eagle Booster, which is not standard, but we liked this card for 2 reasons. Number 1, it protects Sky Striker as 0 from Ash and Bell, which most people, and Imperm and Veiler, which most people use their Ash on 0 instead of waiting for the Engage, because that way you don't have Engage in rotation. You have less spells, you can't add it back with Kagari, so most of the time they will use it on 0. But another really important matchup for Eagle Booster is Radiant Typhoon, because Oh, I didn't say that yet, but we are going first with this deck, and I can talk about that more later. But when you go first against Radiant Typhoon, you have a really, really strong matchup. The only exception is when they have Sheena, because when you activate your first back row and they chain Sheena to bounce all of your spell traps to your hand, there's a realistic chance they just OTK you. And so Eagle Booster, if we have the feeling, like if our opponent is just not hand trapping us at all, and we can set up fully, then I really like searching a copy of Eagle Booster just to make sure we can't get OTK'd. So I really like that card. And in theory, it's also a Liger out if you can make a big Kagari and protect it with Eagle Booster, which in a longer and grindy game against one Liger could actually happen. But yeah. 3 copies of Pot of Desires. This card, I fought very hard against Dinka because I didn't want to play this card, but he kept telling me you have to play this. The deck is not consistent enough. The deck does not have enough starters. It does not have enough card advantage, enough pushes if you don't draw Desires sometimes. And after countless games of testing, I have to admit that that is true. I think you need this card in this deck. We found this was what most of our preparation phase was about, is like how do we combine our two like views on this deck, because he was playing the Desires version, I was playing the no Desires version, and I think ultimately we found a balance, which I'll talk about in a second. We also play 3 copies of Upstart Goblin. This is basically my contribution to this whole thing, because Ka was playing this deck without Upstart Goblin, and he was telling me I was crazy for not playing Desires. I was telling him he was crazy to not play Upstart Goblin, and so ultimately we found peace by playing both. And the way we did this, because the deck is actually quite tight, is we play over 40 cards, which is quite unintuitive with Upstart Goblin in the deck, which is, I don't think it's something I've ever done. But the reason why basically was, I was looking at Ka's deck list and I was like, there's no way you should not just be playing Upstart on top. Like if this list is something that you're happy with, then you should just put Upstart on top, because it just lets you start with free spells in the graveyard. It doesn't hurt your consistency, because it's like a 43 card deck with 3 Upstarts is technically the same as a 40 card deck without Upstart. But with this card in your deck, by making your deck over 40 with this card, you have a better Desires like variants, basically, because these are just basically blanks in your deck that don't matter if you banish them for Desires. And so that's where our testing started, essentially, or basically when we started testing this deck together, we took the 40 card list and then we added 3 Upstarts to it and we started playing 43. We made some adjustments. In the end, the list ended up being 42. So technically even more consistent than the list that we started with, because it was 40 cards, no Upstart. We ended up playing 42 with 3 Upstarts, which felt really counterintuitive in the beginning, but then the longer I played, there's no single card in here that I would cut to make it closer to 40, but I still stand by, I would not play this deck without Upstart Goblin. It is so important to get spells into the graveyard, to have things you can target, or that not target, but send away for linkage, stuff that you can just activate, send for droplet. Like, it's just, there's no reason not to have Upstart in the Sky Striker deck. So ultimately, I think it was fine the way it was, and I can just speak from my perspective. I had basically no issues with Desires throughout the entire 15 rounds. And I can't say for sure that the Upstarts made a difference in that, but of course I banished them a couple of times. And that's just something you don't have to worry about. So that felt nice. 3 droplets, one of the best board breakers in this format in general, but of course in particular in this deck. 3 copies of the Fallen into Virtues. Plays really well with the grindy nature of this deck, but also most importantly, like, dodges Dracotail Flame as well. Like, both of these are phenomenal cards this format, of course, because dodging Dracotail Flame, dodging Dracotail Horn, dodging the MST negation against Radiant Typhoon, and just in general being great removal and board breakers is really what makes this deck thrive. And then the most amazing thing about this card is that not only does it help you break boards, it's also solid in Eruption going first, but you just keep chaining them together, so in a grind game you just get more of these, right? I mean, if you've played this format, I don't really have to tell you how good this card is in a grind game, and this deck is one of the best decks at grinding, so this card is perfect for this deck. 3 copies of Radiant Typhoon Vision and 1 copy of MST. This card is amazing for this deck because you can activate it in the draw phase to play around Droll and Lockbird, which of course with 3 Desires, 3 Upstart in the deck, Droll and Lockbird is a concern, which is why the Upstarts sometimes get sided out. Sometimes the Desires also get sided out in some capacity, but realistically with Droll and Lockbird being at 2 and not really played in the main deck right now, I felt like it was okay to make this concession in the main deck. Vision is an amazing card. 2 spells in the grave immediately. Can search MST if you are up against Radiant Typhoon or Draco Tail going second. And MST is just also a solid card to draw this format. 1 copy of Talents, 1 copy of Rhoda, 1 copy of Called by the Grave, mainly for Ash and Bell, but also for Droll and Lockbird post side. And 1 copy of Crossout Designator. Like I said earlier, these 2 cards are really strong against this deck. They can really hurt your grind game. Of course, it's annoying that you can't hit stuff like Valor or Imperm with this, but you have other cards that can dodge those, like Fallen at the Virtuous, Linkage, Droplet when you're going second. So that's fine. Eagle Booster helps against those as well. And I've cross-outed all kinds of stuff throughout the tournament. I've cross-outed Radiant Typhoon Vision, which won me a game against Radiant Typhoon. You can cross out the Fallen at the Virtuous, which is in a lot of decks. You can cross out Called by the Grave, Talents, even MST technically when you're going up against Radiant Typhoon. But most importantly, it's here for Ash and Bell. So and I felt like that was worth it. Like the risk is basically you draw a cross out and it's dead because they don't have those cards in your hand. But realistically, if you're playing the game and they don't have Ash and Bell in their hand, then it's completely fine to have a dead cross out in your hand. Because your deck produces a lot of card advantage if they don't have Ash or Bell. So I think that's fine. So this is the 42 cards, and so you could cut 2 Upstarts to make it 40. I think that would straight up be incorrect because Upstart is actually a high quality card in this deck. Maybe you can cut like down on some 3-ofs and make them 2-ofs, but realistically, the only way I saw to make it 40 was to cut the cross out and the Bell. But ultimately, I figured those were too important, and I didn't really care about going over 40, like I said, because I think it helps with the Desires math, which I thought was neat. A couple of cards that I didn't decide to play, or that we didn't decide to play, was no multi-roll, because the card is very, very weak to removal. You know, a lot of decks, of course, Mystical Space Typhoon, Fallen into Virtuous, Urgula, it's very hard to rely on multi-roll as a win condition in this format. It is a card that I would have probably searched a couple of times, and it really helps establish a game state that you're really winning in. But ultimately, I just couldn't bring myself to really make room for it in the deck or even go to 43 with it, because I think it's just too weird of a hard draw sometimes. And since we're going first, there's also no need for Afterburner or Jamming Waves, although I will say I lost more dice rolls as I won, as usual, and so I went second a lot, and I would have liked to search Afterburner or Jamming Waves sometimes with Engage, but not having the option was also okay. But I will say those cards are always a consideration in this deck. So that's the main deck. As of now, don't really have any changes I would have liked to make, but quite a fan of it. If you're trying to be risky, you can cut 1 rose. I think that's basically it. Extra deck. 3 zeros and 3 Kagaris. Technically, if you are playing double Lemnis Gate, I think you can get away with 2 of these. But with only 1 Lemnis Gate, if it ever does get banished by Desires, or if we ever use its graveyard effect and it gets banished, we can't get it back. And so having 3 of each, I think, is a good safety net. Although they don't come up that often, the 3rd copy each, but it's good to have. 1 Hayate and 1 Shizuku. No Kaina. Sometimes I missed Kaina just as another thing to linkage into, or another name to put into the graveyard for more Lemnis Gate bounces. Realistically, though, I don't think it's necessary, but it would have come up a couple of times if I had it. Zeke and Azalea, absolutely mandatory. Removal, this is technically the better removal of the 2. However, this one can be made with any attributes and also with opponent's monsters that are not Sky Strikers, as long as the other monster is a Sky Striker ace. So this is really important for linking off stuff you steal with Widow Anchor, which is one of the biggest downsides of not having Camellia in the TCG, is you can't just link off like 2 random monsters that you take with 2 Widow Anchors and get back into a Sky Striker name, which is something that this can technically do if they are light and darks. So both of these really, really essential. SP Little Knight, which comes up a decent amount. This is another thing that you can link into when you take something with Widow Anchor. It's not always possible because linkage locks you into Sky Strikers, but in all the cases where you play without activating linkage, this card comes up a ton. And one way to go summoning SP Little Knight in the extra monster zone and then getting back into the Sky Strikers is also summon it, get the removal effect, and then make one of these 2 by putting another monster next to it, and then you're back into Sky Strikers in the EMZ. All right, so that's it for the links. We have a copy of Albion for the Fallen into Virtuous, followed by a copy of the Dragon that Devours the Dogma. A lot of people have been asking me why I play this card. The reason is that I want to be able to chain all three Fallen into Virtuous together, right? So the first one typically sends Albion. Albion then sets, let's say I'm going second, right? I'm going second, I activate the Fallen into Virtuous, I send Albion. Then in the end phase, I get another copy of Fallen, I set it from the Albion. On my opponent's turn, I use this, sending Dogma to get the pop. And then in my opponent's end phase, it doesn't matter that this isn't Albion, because I'm just adding this to my hand, that's fine. Next turn, it's my turn, I can now use it from my hand, sending the Ecclesia Synchro for another pop. And then I can use the Ecclesia Synchro in the grave to shuffle one of these two back and then get another removal effect. So this way, in a grind game, you can very efficiently use all three copies of the Fallen into Virtuous, unless one gets banished with Desires, that's fine, I guess. The other reason why it's this one is because technically, if you Shark Cannon a Fallen of Albaz against Dracotail, you can make it. And that it didn't come up in the YCS, but it did come up in testing. That's huge sometimes, if you can just basically super poly two of their monsters utilizing Shark Cannon. So I would always like to play the split of 1 and 1. But you could also play Alba Lenitus instead, which doesn't search the Fallen into Virtuous, but can be a pretty neat card against the Dracotail matchup as well, because you could contact fuse their board, either because they leave Albaz on the board, or because you Shark Cannon the Albaz and then you just contact fuse, which is neat. But yeah, the Ecclesia is absolutely mandatory because it's great to be able to turn a copy of Fallen into Virtuous into a double removal, basically, on a follow-up turn. And then the last card is Typhon. Comes up a decent amount. Once again, similar thing to SP, can only be summoned in games where you are not locked by linkage. But since we are playing very few hand traps and mostly are planning to use the hand traps on our own turn, we will not be preventing our opponent from summoning from the extra deck. So the Typhon is almost always an option, and sometimes it comes up. Sometimes you still lose those games, but a lot of the times it's actually a very clutch, like last-ditch effort removal thingy that clears the board, and then you try to prevent the follow-up turn. So that's the extra deck. For that one, I've got no changes. Unless you go up to 2 Lemniscate in the main deck, then I think you can cut a 0 and or a Kagari for more utility. Alright, side deck. The only other hand trap I'm siding, or we were siding, is Droll and Lockbird. No Charmies, because I think even though we are going first in game 1, and we expect everyone to go first against us after siding, which is also what everyone is doing, or was doing at the YCS. I had no one send me first. I hate drawing Charmies when I'm breaking a board. Like, this deck draws a lot of cards on its own turn when it's playing into boards. You know, a whole lot of strategy in this deck going second surrounds, like, start playing breakers into the board, then activate engages and draw cards. If you draw Charmies in those situations, it's really, really bad. So normally you would think like, oh, draw your board breakers with the Charmies. That sounds great, which if it happens in that order, yes, that's awesome. But because you draw so many cards, usually it happens in the other order. Usually you activate spells and then draw Charmies, which is bad. Droll and Lockbird is also not a great top deck in those situations, but Droll and Lockbird is one of the few things that we could think of that would actually stop some of our really, really bad matchups. Like, let's say, Spell Canceller, like in K9 situations, right? Like, that's obviously a bad matchup for Sky Striker. So, wanted to have Droll for this, but also a key difference between Droll and Molcharmies is we can side it going first into stuff like Radiant Typhoon. Once again, if they draw Sheena, Radiant Typhoon can be a scary matchup. So having Droll in your hand going first as a safety net is really nice against it. And also means that we have Droll in the deck for crossout, which is neat when we're going first. So a lot of things that Droll does better than Charmies for this deck in particular. Didn't play that many matchups where I wanted to side Droll. And when I sided it, I didn't open it. So can't really say much about it. But there's a couple of games where I wish I had it, I guess. One Hamp. I'm not sure how I feel about this card. It's a searchable kaiju essentially, but it is hard once per turn. It's better than having no answer to cards like Liger Dancer, even though the problem in the Lunalight matchup is that they typically have 2 Liger Dancers. And in those situations, you'd have to hamp one of them and then try to survive the turn to enable to get the hamp back with, like, you have to shuffle it back into the deck with Lemniscate and then search it again, which is all no problem as long as you survive. Which is another reason why the Eagle Booster is neat, right? If you can somehow summon a big, like, let's say a 3000 0 with linkage and then Eagle Booster it successfully, then you have the time to recycle the Hamp. But it is hard, but it's better than having 0%. Also, in theory, if you draw this together with Ray, you can also out stuff like Spell Canceller and stuff. But we have another card in here that helps us survive, is Forbidden Crown. I really like this card, but since the main deck is super tight, and we already are above 40, we decided to side deck it for 2 specific scenarios. It's an awesome card going first. I side it in almost any matchup when I start. Because it just, either you use it disruptively on your opponent's stuff, you know, like, I don't know, you think of a normal summon Lucius, you crown it. Really nice, because they don't get the search and they can't fuse it off later, they can't even dodge it with 5 mana. Same thing against Radiant Typhoon, you know, it's like you can crown stuff like Crocea or Eldam or whatever, and then they just can't link it off into the link 2 as well, can't attack with it, and so on and so forth. But also, you can crown your own stuff and you will not die. Even if they have Sheena, doesn't matter. You just crown your thing and you will survive. So you can play a very greedy game plan if you have this card. It helps you survive against Lunalight. The only matchup where I really sided going second is Vanquish Soul, because there's a lot of ways how you can sneak in an OTK over the Rock Link 1, because it has 0 attack, so you can just crown it. I guess I also sided going second against Yummy for the same reason, because you can just crown the Snatchy and then attack it a couple of times, which comes up. So this card is very versatile. Unfortunately, we didn't have the room in the main deck, but I will say every time I sided it and then drew it, it was pretty solid for me. So I was a fan of this card in this deck. Another card that we added after we added the Eagle Booster and the Forbidden Crown was 3 copies of Shared Ride. I love playing with this card, but essentially it goes really well with this sort of like game plan that we have of like searching Eagle Booster going first, or having Forbidden Crown and just another couple of solid interactions. If you have this card set against decks like Radiant Typhoon, K9 stuff, Vanquish Soul, anything that searches a decent amount of time, and you have any means of surviving the turn, whether it's Crown or Eagle Booster or just in general a couple of disruptions, this card easily solidifies like the win every time. And it's also one of the best cards if you are bricking on non-engine or you get hand trapped. Then you have Shared Ride to basically stop your opponent from popping off and also draw follow-up. So Shared Ride, awesome card in this deck. Mostly in testing, didn't draw it very often in the tournament. Also because I happened, like a lot of the matchups where I would side it in, I ended up 2-0ing over the weekend. Like Radiant Typhoons, I 2-0'd a lot of them. So like I went second in game 2, so I didn't put it in. Vanquish Soul, same thing. I played against one K9 Vanquish Soul and I 2-0'd that one. So I didn't get to side the Shared Ride in that matchup, but I'm sure if I would have seen it, I would have liked it a lot. 2 copies of Thrust. This is another one of those that we unfortunately did not play in the main deck. There's a couple of decks this format that simply don't play as many hand traps, which is a good sign. There's a lot of things going on in Yu-Gi-Oh right now that are pretty awesome. One of them being that decks in the format don't require you to hand trap them to death or you auto lose the game. Stuff like Draco Tail or Radiant Typhoon are decks that you can very well beat their full boards, which I was doing all weekend. But it also means that in a lot of games, your opponent doesn't hand trap you. So Thrust going first is a completely dead card. But it is a really good card going second, because you can search for breakers. You can also just grab Engage, which is what you do most of the time. So having extra copies of Engage to side in for going second is very crucial. Didn't want it to be 3, because you always have to have plays before you trigger Thrust. And in some matchups, like Draco Tail, they also, not every interaction is monster based in this format, right? Like you've got Radiant Typhoon with the Mystical Space Typhoons, you've got Draco Tail with their trap cards. So realistically, you don't want to draw Thrust like every single hand or alongside no ways of baiting monster effects. So don't want to go too hard on that Thrust game plan essentially. But there's a couple of matchups where this card is completely amazing. And in general, I sided going second every time. But I just don't want to have 3 in the deck. 2 Lightning Storms and a Feather Duster. This is insane against Radiant Typhoon and Draco Tail if you have it alongside 1 dodge. So essentially like anything that dodges Flame against Draco Tail or the MST negation against Radiant Typhoon, you have so many ways of stopping these. Even sometimes Ray can even do it, because you can summon Ray and make 0 and then use 0 tag out effect to pop the flame and then Duster. Doesn't work with Lightning Storm because you're gonna have a board. But like basically all of these cards up here, if you pair them with these breakers, you have a chance to just force through the Duster or Lightning Storm. And especially against Draco Tail, if you resolve one of these two, it's really, really good because they are out of traps essentially immediately. Because usually we're letting them set up all 3 trap cards, and then we're Lightning Storming or Dustering them away, and then we usually win the grind game from there. We don't have to OTK. I basically never OTK the entire weekend. The goal is always break the board and then deal with their follow-up and outgrind from there. And these cards go perfectly with that because they help you break the board and they ruin their follow-up completely because the Draco Tail traps are all gone at once and they can't recycle each other. Last card in the side deck is Different Dimension Ground. I cite this card against Draco Tail even going second because once again the plan is break the board and establish follow-up. And that is relatively easy to do against Draco Tail, the board breaking part. The stopping their follow-up part is not always that easy, which is why I also cited going second. It is the only matchup where we side Thrust going first, essentially, because in all the other matchups we don't have a trap. But against Draco Tail, I think they play enough hand traps to justify siding Thrust going first. Also, sometimes they have 5 mana, and then you can Thrust for a spell. And in general, DDG is like I mean, it's obviously a really strong card in this matchup. I don't have to tell you why, but yeah, that's the side deck. I think this deck was a solid meta call, judging on the matchups that I faced, which was also the reason why I played it. I think it has a solid Draco Tail matchup, has a really strong Radiant Typhoon matchup. I think it pairs decently well into Vanquish Soul as well. But just to mention, it also does have some mediocre matchups in this format. Most importantly, when you are, this is also the reason why we're going first, there's a couple of matchups when you go second against them, you will lose most of the time. For example, K9 Crystron, if they summon Spell Canceller, it's really tough. If Draco Tail decks decide to play Invader of Darkness, that can be hard, but you do have normal spells to out it sometimes. Also, Ray does a good job at outing stuff like that as well via the 0 pop. But in general, a couple of matchups like Lunalight as well. Like, I mean, we have Hamp, we have Eagle Booster, so technically we can make a big Kagari, but it's not a good matchup. I'm not going to pretend like Lunalight is a good matchup for this deck if they go first. If you go first, it's fine. In general, on the decision to go first with Sky Striker, I just felt like this deck is mostly weak to the non-engine in the format. You know, there's Ash Blossom everywhere, there's Ghost Bell everywhere, and these cards are really good against this deck. So going second, you look, basically every time you go second with this deck, you look at your opponent's board and you're like, okay, I can beat this if they don't have too much non-engine behind it, right? If Draco Tail goes first and they draw like Nib, Fuwa, or some of the other non-engine that they play, even like Veiler is fine, you will beat them with an average hand. But if they open Ash and Bell or Ash and Droll or whatever, then it's really hard, which is all the, like, I played against like 6 Draco Tails, I think, and I lost, my only loss was to Draco Tail, and every time I lost to Draco Tail, it was because they drew a really good mix of engine and non-engine. Like, it was like full Draco Tail board with Albaz cards and then Ash and Bell in hand. Or my first loss on day 1, or my only loss on day 1 was to Draco Tail opening full board plus Solemn Judgment plus Droll and Lockbird, and so on and so forth. So essentially, and that brings me to the reason to going first, is because when you go first, usually you will bait these cards out before your opponent has a full board that you're trying to deal with. So if you go first and you get Ash somewhere, that's fine. You will usually still set up something, interruption for their turn and so on and so forth. So you start grinding from there, but you start grinding essentially when they already have spent an Ash or a Bell. And that's really important for this deck, I think. So we just tried to cover some variance by going first instead of blinding second, because blinding second, you basically always commit to breaking every single board in the format, even if they draw non-engine behind it, which I think is just not consistently possible. I did it a couple of times. I broke boards. I won going second. Like I said, my dice roll win rate was definitely negative over the weekend. And I was happy I played this deck, because this deck is one of the better decks at going second in the format, but it's not that good at going going second that I want to do it on purpose every single game. I'd rather go first, set up disruptions, and bait out some of the hand traps already. But yeah, that was my experience with Sky Striker. I hope it was insightful. Feel free to ask more questions down below. Once again, huge shout out to my team, Raiden Trade, but also most importantly, Dinka Bui for preparing the deck with me and also playing the same list and also getting to day 2. Hope you enjoyed the deck profile. Really happy to perform with one of my favorite decks and one of the basically underdog decks in the format right now. Had a lot of fun this event in general. It's not just this deck, but the format right now feels awesome. You know, Draco Tail, Radiant Typhoon, Vanquish Soul, a lot of decks that I really vibe with are doing well right now. Really nice to see that. Hope everyone had a great time playing or watching the 300th YCS. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, we are getting very close to 100K subscribers, so please do me that favor if you aren't subscribed yet. Feel free to do so. Without further ado, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time, duelists. Bye-bye.